I mean, we did this, what? I mean, maybe, when was it, 6 or 7 years ago?
Great. So really great.
Yeah, that would have been Heather Moran era.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Hey, so are you all pressed off?
Yeah. Well,
No.
mostly we're pressing one of the last lots tomorrow. Actually, we have one more after
The
that. So the
Grenache,
Grenache
yeah.
still to press too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're pressing our last Syrah tomorrow, and we have a Grenache lot that I think is ready.
Should be ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It was a weird year.
weird year all the way around.
We were bringing in Pinot Noir to our winery, for Jim after he had already brought in Nebbiolo from Biennacido.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I know. It was really unusual in terms of the ripening times of some of these varieties. It was, I don't know if you experienced similar things, but.
And the first.
Well, we might have experienced similar things only in that we had a big gap actually between bringing in the white aromatics and the Pinot Noir, and then we get Cab out of San Miguel, Cab and Zin and Petit Syrah.
Mm-hmm.
And we had emptied all of our tanks and we were just waiting for this other fruit to get ripe. So it was like we had two harvests. We didn't have an overlap, or it didn't seem too strange, but
Yeah.
Nice.
we had a little bit of a break, which was nice. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had no break. It just kept coming.
You can do that.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's 5:01 on Wednesday, so I think we should get started.
Okay.
And I am Paula Dooley from Stephen Ross Wine Cellars, but I'm here today for the Slow Coast Wine Collective. And 5:01 Wednesday is a Zoom chat with people from the Slow Coast region to talk about vineyards, anything that we want to talk about with a love of wine. And today I'm here with Bob and Louisa Lindquist, owners and winemakers of Lindquist family wines, Verdad wines, and Sawyer Lindquist wines. So thank you for coming today, Bob and Louisa. And my first question is always, what's in your glasses?
We have the 2018 Albarino from the Sawyer Lindquist Vineyard here in the Edna Valley.
Nice.
Which is Demeter certified biodynamic, which I know that kind of segues into what you.
To Vanna White moment
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, hold it up there.
What we agreed to kind of talk about tonight was biodynamic farming and wines.
Yeah, I am really excited about this topic because I know very little. And so I'm very interested in it. And I'm going to start in the beginning. And when and how and why did you guys develop this commitment to this practice of biodynamic wine grape farming?
Well, in the early 2000s, we met a gentleman at this event called Hospice de Rhone in Paso Robles. And he was from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, his name Philippe Armenier. And he had been brought over from Châteauneuf-du-Pape to Sonoma to start a biodynamic vineyard project for Kendall Jackson. And so he moved his whole family and his wife's grand piano to Sonoma for this project with Kendall Jackson. 6 months later, KJ decided to pull the plug on the project. And Philippe is like, well, what am I going to do now? So he happened to come to this event, this Hospice de Rhone event. We met him there and he kind of pitched us on the concept. And it was something we were already aware of, but we weren't into it. We weren't that familiar with the process. And at the same dinner that we were at together was Steve Beckman from Beckman Winery in Los Olivos.
He's a good friend.
Yeah, great friend of ours. And Steve actually hired Philippe to come down to his vineyard and consult. And so that's kind of how it all started, was with Philippe Armenier meeting Steve Beckman going into biodynamics and we seeing Steve's results. And a couple of years later, when we planted the vineyard in the Edna Valley, that's what we decided to do.
And we were going back and forth. Did we do it organic or try biodynamics? And we were kind of leaning more towards organic. And Bob had a sales trip to London where he met with friends who are biodynamic farmers and winemakers. And they
in France.
In France, yeah. And they enthusiastically talked him into biodynamic, and so that kind of made us turn towards that because it was Dominique Lafon and Andre Ostertag, and their wines are incredible. So, I mean, that's a high water mark to shoot for, but
No, and
certainly.
their pitch was, if you're planting a new vineyard, which we were at that time, and I don't know if you remember 05, we had a lot of rain that winter of 04, 05, and Steve probably remembers, but we could not get into the vineyard site in March, April to get to work the ground and get the vines ready to plant because the ground was too wet, especially in the low-lying areas. So we had to delay the planting. And this trip that I took to London, where I met with Andre and Dominique, was in like May of that year. We hadn't planted yet, which we were planting late for planting a new vineyard. And their pitch was, hey, if you're planting a new vineyard and you're thinking about biodynamics, just do it, and you'll never regret it.
And it was from meeting, so that kind of made it cool too.
So from the get-go, there were things you needed to do in planting the vineyard to develop a biodynamic practice. Like what?
Well, the first thing was getting the preparations that are used in biodynamic farming and getting them on the soil before we even planted the first vines. So that's where we started, and then we immediately started trying to source organic cow manure to make compost, which turned out to be a bigger challenge than we thought.
Any cow manure,
if
you don't have cows, is quite difficult on the Central Coast because dairies have disappeared for the most part. So,
and then trucking, the nearest organic, manure was a ways away, so we had to pay for the trucking. Long story short, we did it. We also incorporated some organic horse manure, which was okay in the biodynamic ethos to incorporate horse, which we did as well. And so we got a compost pile going, got the preparations on the ground, tilled the ground properly, and then planted the first vines.
It's just so interesting. And then so you plant the vineyard and you grow the grapes. And what does it mean to the consumer in the glass? Like, what does it mean to the wines and to the consumer to have made this investment?
Well, I think now it's become more meaningful in the last few years. When we first started doing it, our first wines from that vineyard, we had a little bit from 08 and then a real harvest in 09. And it didn't mean a lot to a lot of people. It was organic, specifically our distributors in places like New York. We had our brokers say, I know you have to charge more because it's more labor intensive and you're spending a lot in the vineyard, but I don't think anybody cares here. I think maybe the percentage that cares in our marketplace is so small that it doesn't matter. Well, of course it mattered to us, because we saw the results of just really expressive wines that had a purity to them and minerality, and just there's a common thread running through the wines from that vineyard, and indeed from, I think all biodynamic vineyards have a real clear expression. But that was a little disheartening. In the last few years, there's been a lot of interest and people want clean wines, whatever that might mean. So it's become a lot more meaningful as more and more people want to eat organically. But biodynamic, of course, takes a little bit of explanation. So it has become resonant and more meaningful in the last few years, which is gratifying, finally.
I wish people would jump on to appreciating biodynamic wines and organic wines more than the natural wines, which really doesn't mean anything and right. Tends to mean that that crummy wine is good because it's natural. But I mean the biodynamic farming has a system of certification that people can aspire to.
That's right. And in fact, I tell people that when they talk about natural wine, I say, well, biodynamic, I say Demeter certified biodynamic wine is the gold standard of natural wine. And yes, we are permitted to add sulfur, which is an organic product, and it helps keep the wine fresh and helps make the wine, stable, shelf
Right.
stable, which it wouldn't be otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you think that farming practices make the wines more expressive of their unique sites than if it were conventionally farmed in that place? You know, I don't know if that's a very well stated question, but
Well,
I know what you mean. No,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, well, one of the things, because biodynamics focuses so much on getting the organic content up in a soil and having the soil be alive, I do think that translates into really healthy vines and healthy grapes. So there's not a lot masking there. It's a pure product without a lot of chemical additions into the soil. And you have to think there is pesticide residue in almost all wines, including, unfortunately, even biodynamic wines. There's traceable amounts of Roundup because the soils have been farmed commercially for so long. So I do think that the healthy, high organic content soils do make a difference in the flavor profile. What do you think?
I think so too. No, I
Yeah.
think the wines definitely have a sense of place, which, wines have a sense of place regardless of how they're farmed. But I think that biodynamic farming accentuates that and maybe magnifies it a little bit even.
Is it more expensive to farm biodynamically?
Initially.
Only in the beginning, because of all the equipment you need, the inputs you need, the number of passes that you have to make in the vineyard. But once the vines kind of reach, when they start to mature a little bit and the vines kind of reach an equilibrium, where they kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Come into their own, mature.
Yeah. Anyways, once they're
Once they're grown up.
established.
anyways, once they hit their stride, that's a different way of saying it. But once the vines hit their stride, there's less involvement and less that you have to do in the vineyard. The vines kind of, they kind of naturally grow well. And I mean, you still have to do all the things that you would normally do, in terms of pruning and farming and spraying with the biodynamic preparations.
Right.
But there's just less that you have to do and less passes that you have to make in the vineyard once the vines reach maturity.
The roots are established and they're healthy.
The organisms are stronger and more self-sufficient.
That's
So-
right. That's right. And in the biodynamic ethos, the Europeans will tell you, or Philippe Armenier, who the consultant we use also, said that, once these vines are established, they're going to be healthier. And so they'll be more resistant to disease. They'll be more resistant to pests. And what we found out is they're definitely not resistant, though, to, birds and ground squirrels and gophers. Those kind of things need to be dealt with in a completely different way.
Right.
Be interesting if they're resistant to red blotch, which seems to be creeping its way around the Central Coast.
I don't think it makes them resistant to it, but I think it helps with their health. I mean, this is just from by observation, and just seeing, how the vines are. They seem to be stronger.
Yeah.
And would you say that biodynamic wine grape growing has been embraced more widely in other countries? Or are we just a bigger country, because you guys there are people around here who do a few things, but nobody who's committed like you guys are.
Well, there are more, I mentioned, Steve Beckman earlier, but Tablas Creek is a great example in Paso Robles of somebody who's embraced even going beyond biodynamic to regenerative farming. That's a tough word.
That is a big one.
Yeah. And then we have several vineyards outside of the Edna Valley that we also buy grapes from that are Demeter certified biodynamic. There's 3 down in Santa Barbara County that we're working with now. So there are more, but it's a very small percentage of the overall acreage. It's cheaper to spray synthetic fertilizer and synthetic pesticides and herbicides, than it is to go the extra steps that you have to for organic farming or biodynamic farming.
Well, and I also think that biodynamic farming has got a little bit of a bad rap that it's starting to overcome, in that it's like the hippy dippies having, getting naked and dancing in the vines under a full moon. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it is really just traditional agriculture. And if you follow the biodynamic calendar, it very much is similar to the Farmer's Almanac, about what you do in the vineyard, and takes into consideration the lunar cycle and the way that affects the gravity of the way things grow. And it's just, we've gotten out of touch with that a little bit. But I think people have a hard time. I remember when we were introducing our first wines from the Sawyer Lindquist vineyard in New York, again, it comes up. I was at a supplier tasting with our distributor, and all the suppliers were there. And I had a pretty well-known winemaker from Napa Valley, who I respect a lot, come up to me and said, I like the wines very much. I don't believe in biodynamic, but I like the wines very much. It's like, okay, thank you. Okay. So,
it is controversial, but it's I don't want to say a proven method of organic farming, but it has a lot of followers, and it's just organic farming to like the next degree,
it kind of reminds me of my grandparents, who were dairy farmers in Michigan. 160 acres. They had 38 cows or something like that, but they would grow things for the cows. They had an apple orchard. They had some virgin woods there, but everything stayed on the farm, especially going through the Depression. I mean, they had the cow manure went back out in the fields. They would grow things for the cows, and it was an enclosed system. And I think really that's what biodynamic farming talks about, is that you don't bring in manufactured fertilizers, you don't ship stuff away, you deal with it on site, and you can compost and spread fertilizer and things like that.
So one of the,
it's just we have a fancy term for it now.
well, the educational takeaway is I'm getting is to don't be distracted by the crystals and the things that people can't touch and feel and smell with their hands. The whole system is amazing and should be embraced. And if you like the other stuff, then great, do it, but don't discount the other stuff just because you don't believe in some little part of it.
Exactly. Right? One of the things I like to say about biodynamic farming is that modern farming is only about 100 years old. In fact, even less than that. And obviously, man has been farming on Earth for centuries and centuries, and a lot of the ancient peoples knew that if they did certain things certain ways, they had better results in their, with their crops. If they planted on a full moon, or if they did this on a certain date, or when the stars were in a certain place, a lot of these, Native Americans and ancient peoples, figured that stuff out over the centuries. And it really wasn't until the 1920s that this man, Rudolf Steiner, kind of assembled all those concepts into, what is pretty much an applied science. And some of it is very hoodoo voodoo-ish, no doubt about it. But some of it is based on real, proven scientific methods. And that's kind of what we look at. And as much as anything, the amount of time that you spend looking at the vineyard, taking care of the vineyard, is as important as any part of the biodynamic process.
Yeah, and going back to your point about other countries, Paula, one of the things that I recall Philippe Armenier say, the reason why he got turned on to biodynamics is because in his family winery, Domaine de Marcoux in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, they had been farming it for a few hundred years. And so the soils became stale.
They were dead.
Sterile. And so he just realized that they needed to do something to liven up the vines and to bring life into it. And so he really became an advocate. And I think that's what happened with, I think, DRC
Right.
is
And
biodynamic now.
Certainly
and
Dominique Lafon,
Yeah.
his soils were dead. And it was because of, years of modern farming and utilizing, the latest product from Monsanto or DuPont or whoever it was that they were utilizing the latest product from to cut corners in the vineyard.
Mhm.
And they didn't realize that they were actually, harming the soil when they started that. Eventually they figured that out.
It's a long game versus a short game.
That's right.
Yeah.
Not kidding.
But what does it take to become Demeter certified? I said it right. I think I said it right.
Demeter certified biodynamic. Yeah. So Demeter is an organization that was started in Germany. It's kind of a European based organization, but they have an outpost in Oregon here with I don't know how many people that work for Demeter, but I like to call them hippie bureaucrats because Demeter is not regulated by the U.S. government. They have their own regulations. But anyways, what it takes is getting certification by this organization. So you have to farm using their techniques and make the wine using their techniques, and for a certain period of time. Luckily, where we planted this vineyard in the Edna Valley, the guy who owned the ground before we bought it had been farming organically next door. So we already had a little bit of a head start, and he had been, in this ground had been used for cattle grazing, and he was not using, anything synthetic with the cows, except maybe some, what is it, like some antibiotics that are commonly used in cattle, in raising cattle.
Right.
So the ground was pretty clean already. And it took us, we planted in 2005, and it took us until 2009 to get the certification.
So that's fairly onerous. That's a long time. It's like organic certification is dangerously long.
It's paperwork and an inspection, and just having all the right answers, for the inspector when they come, not only to the vineyard but also to the winery. They inspect them separately.
And it's two different certifications. One is for the vineyard and the other is for the winemaking. And you can't put made with biodynamic grapes or Demeter certified biodynamic anything on the label if the wine isn't separately certified as biodynamic and the standards. So that was a big surprise to us. And I think that was one of the things we were quite resistant about in the first place, because we totally were on board with the farming, but hey, I can't add yeast, I can't put yeast in, and I can't make different acid adjustments, or you can, but then it's downgraded depending on the vintage. And so that was a scary step to take for us as winemakers. And so, we've had, especially I think with white, sometimes I've had some stuck fermentations. You not so much. Albarino, right, because it's so high acid. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been mostly Albarino that's been the problem child with the biodynamic concept.
Yeah,
moving it out into the sun to warm it up, get that fermentation going. That's got to be approved. It's the sun.
Yeah. So that was the biggest leap of faith, I think, for me. But I think I totally get it with people wanting to make natural wine. And I agree with you that the problem with that is there's no standards. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
So with biodynamic winemaking, then what are some of what do you have to do? Is it more like no yeast? You alluded to the fact that you can use sulfites.
Right.
Yeah.
But no yeast, no malolactic bacteria, limited additions like acid.
Those are the main aspects. No yeast addition, no mallow addition, no acid addition. Although you can get a
Well, you can add up
You
to
can
1.5 grams of acid per liter, but it's downgraded to made with biodynamic grapes.
instead of being Demeter certified biodynamic.
And-
In order
Oh.
to be Demeter certified biodynamic, you're not supposed to add any acid at all.
Right.
Okay.
Anything.
This,
Or
so this
anything.
vintage, we will have a lot of wines that will be made with biodynamic, grapes.
Right. Yep.
Instead of, because we had to add acid to almost everything
It's
this
crazy.
year.
Weird
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
I mean, we didn't have to, but we chose to.
Well, to get the
as
wines in balance,
wine
we had
makers.
really, we had
high
we had the
pH.
lowest acidities that I've ever seen in our.
Okay, I'm so glad to hear that because I'm wrestling with the same thing. I mean, we got our vineyard, Stone Corral tends to need acid. And it's not unusual that we make pretty significant acid additions. And this year I sort of, okay, I'll just kind of do it again. The normal high acid addition, 2 grams per liter. And the pH is still pretty high after fermentation. It's like, what's happening? It's like really low really low acidities and high pHs this year.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that. Just me.
I think it was all, it was, we had a really warm year, and I think that burned it. And then I think that it was almost like a 10-day heat wave that we had in the middle of August. I think that burned a lot of the acidity out of the grapes.
I look back at the 2020 vintage as like running through a minefield thinking, we're going to blow up. This is going to be terrible. We're going to get burned. And then we got to the end and went, oh, okay. Yeah, it's going to be okay. It was frightening at the time, but here we are in November and we're okay.
We got through it, and the wines are actually pretty good, even though even having to add acid. What I like to say, because people are asking me, I just say, I think it's going to be a very user-friendly vintage. The wines are very forward and easy to drink, and maybe not the best vintage we ever had. In fact, far from it. But the wines are still good. It was not a disaster by any means.
Well, I think it depends on the style that you like. Also, some people prefer more. They don't want they don't want to wait for the wines to come around for a year before they're drinkable because the acid is so high, which tends to happen in vintages like 18 and 19. So it'll happen.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering if, so with grapes that are grown in a very natural way and fed natural products and all that stuff, are the fermentations cleaner? Do you find that they're nice, clean fermentations and that they do ferment and they have, they have no issues? And
generally, and it's a little complicated with us because we share a winery with another winery that does not, with actually several wineries now that are not biodynamic. So
there could be yeast floating around in the cellar that may get into your fermentations.
There are, in fact, and so for us, the native yeast is probably just the alpha yeast.
Cellar yeast.
That exists in the winery.
Well,
so
we have lots of arguments about this. So
it's really
we haven't scientifically checked it, so it's hard to say actually what happens in the vineyard, what happens in the tank when the grapes are all crowded together.
Right.
Those yeast DNA tests that one can do are a great theory, but to write the check for it,
forget it. Yeah.
Forget it. Exactly. I'm like, I don't really need to know that badly. Like, it would be interesting to know, but it's really, you're making the wine and the wine tastes good. Don't really need to know what my, same with dogs. I don't really need to know what my dog's made of.
Does its job and gets the wine dry. That's what
yes.
Right. For the most part, we've had a few hiccups on the way, but for the most part, it's worked out.
Well, who doesn't?
Yeah.
Getting the wines into bottle, is filtration a possibility or no filtration?
Yeah, no filtration is fine.
No filtration.
No, filtration is fine, and fining is also permitted as long as you use, like if you're doing red wines and you're fining with egg whites, you have to make sure that you have organic egg whites. Right. And
right.
bentonite is fine because a bentonite is an organic product, and gelatin, if you wanted to use gelatin, as long as it's organic gelatin, again. So
but sorry, filtration is okay.
Filtration is okay.
But it light filtration, they don't, as little handling as possible.
Yeah, a loose clarifying filtration.
Yeah, that is absolutely fine. It's interesting though, going out in the marketplace recently, about a year ago in LA, and I was showing the biodynamic wines, and with the natural wine movement, some of our wines are filtered, and I had people just go, "Oh, forget it. They've been worked too much by human hands," and it was like, really? You know?
Yeah,
You'd rather drink
You just
cloudy
can't
wine.
win. You just
that's a
can't.
very frustrating conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about bottled wine a little bit, because we're going into the Harvest on the Coast event this weekend, and you guys have a couple of virtual events
Yeah.
and packages for sale. What do you have, and when are they?
Why don't
You
you-
go, oh, okay. Okay, so I'm doing basically a biodynamic flight,
Oh.
from wines from the Sawyer, from the End of Valley Sawyer Lindquist Vineyard. The wines that I make under the Lindquist brand and also under the Sawyer Lindquist brand. And then Louisa's doing, well, I'll let you tell it.
I'm doing also biodynamic. It's a vertical of the Tempranillo I make from the Sawyer Lindquist Vineyard. So it's five different vintages and highlight, I think it's 13 through 17. So we're just highlighting what happens over the different vintages and what the weather does to affect the wine. So it'll be kind of a fun exploring the weather, the wine, and the vintage.
And the details
And-
are on the Slow Coastal, website.
Yeah, okay.
for
And
our-
to people who are watching, I did not know that the biodynamic was a focus of your tastings at all. In fact, when we started 501 a long time ago, I thought we should do one on biodynamic. So this just all happened at the same time.
Yeah.
And so people can pop in to buy these packages or order them online. If they want to get them before your tastings, they need to hop to, it sounds like.
They'd have to do it pretty quickly if they wanted to do it live, but it's also going to be recorded, so it could be done later if you don't have the time to do it during the live presentations.
Right. Well, Bob's is on Sunday at 3:00. So if you're around town, you can pick up the wines here, and mine's tomorrow at 5. So if you're really interested, you can come in and we have the wines available for you to pick up
That's right. You'd have to get them at the tasting room basically if you wanted to do the live.
for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fun to, even if they can't get the package in time, it's fun to go to the tasting. I've been known to go to tastings without the wine before and just take notes and then hunt them down later, the ones that interest me. So that's always an option for people. And then I'm going to throw a little bit out because we're heading into Thanksgiving after Harvest on the Coast. And are you guys open over the Thanksgiving weekend?
We
And
won't be
Yeah.
Thanksgiving Day, but we will be the rest of the weekend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as people are looking at smaller gatherings for Thanksgiving, I keep telling them a smaller gathering, you can still have really great wine, maybe fewer of them, but you can still pick up some wines such as yours, which would be great for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank
have
you.
we'll have a lot of magnums for sale
That's
over
a good-
the holidays. Yeah.
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 So you can check out www.verdadwine.com, and that has both Lindquist family and Verdad wines. And our tasting room is in Arroyo Grande. And I'm hoping to check in on your tasting as well, which is the Pinot Noir tasting, right, for Stephen Dooley.
Steve has a whole lineup to do on Friday, which
Friday at 5. Yep.
Great.
I think
Just a
I
whole
will
bunch of
not.
wines.
I will not be there because I'm traveling unless it's Zoom works at like 85 miles an hour, and then we'll see. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. Go drink something delicious and eat something amazing, and don't check election results until tomorrow.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you.
All
Steve.
right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.